turning the question round, and you have touched on this already, some people have suggested that, you know, if Scotland does vote yes, then we're actually abandoning our brothers and sisters, as some people refer to it, in England. However, some other people would actually argue that if Scotland were to move forward and have a democratic socialism, that it would actually provide a beacon for people in England for a way that they could move forward. Which position would you take?
I think it might encourage socialists in England, but you have to understand how England has developed. England, in power terms, is London in the southeast now. It's almost like a mini state inside that country, sucking the life out of its regional parts. So I actually fear for folk in the northeast and Merseyside, because they're trapped in that situation in which London in the southeast dominates their economy and dominates their politics. The argument put by Douglas Alexander and others is to try and give the Labour voter a way out of voting yes, on the grounds that we owe it to the northeast and we owe it to Merseyside to keep voting to give them the hope of a Labour government. Well, the answer to that is we've done it time after time after time after time after time, and we don't get it. And then when we do get a Labour government, because of the dominance of the English middle class, especially in the southeast, we don't really get a real Labour government, we get a watered down version. 2 weeks ago, Miliband wrote an article in the Daily Telegraph. Now, it was no problem for him up here. There's very few Daily Telegraphs sold up here. And the folk who read it, well, they're basically fundamentally Tory anyway. So he was in quite safe grounds in writing for England. And he was writing for the English middle class. No any hesitation, not the white working class or the Merseyside, it was the English middle class, about his angst over the condition that they're in and the pressures that they're under at the present time. So if Labour has to win an election in the UK as constituted at the moment, it has to pitch its case not to us, but to the middle class in England. So the Labour Party in Scotland's got the middle class of England on its back time after time after time. No matter what their ideas are up here, it's down there that matters. So we've done our bit. And we want a Labour Party up here. And we want a Socialist Party up here, which has our principles and the implementation of our principles and our policies. And once they get the English middle class off their back, then we might see a better Labour Party up here in reality. Right now, Joanne Lamont has to look over her shoulder to see whether or not anything she might do is actually approved, because they can't upset the middle class in England. And the middle class in England's a different middle class from ours, by the way. There is a genuine historical middle and upper middle class in England. The kind of middle and upper middle class here has been historically a very small one. Like our aristocracy doesn't count for a row of beans up here. The middle class in Scotland, the biggest proportion of it is like me. I live in the Grange in Edinburgh, middle class area. I've got a middle class pension. I live in a middle class home. I am working class because I am first generation middle class. My daughter lives in Alloway, which is a very posh area of Ayr, but she's working class, and all her attitudes and outlook and her instinctive responses. And we're a different middle class to the one down in England. We don't need to pander to a middle class up here with policies that don't suit the working class, because basically our middle class is still working class, have taken the values of their fathers and their mothers with them. And there's a big, big difference.
One of the, and I take you into a little more detail in your book now, the broad topics that we've talked about so far. One of the things that we often hear in the independence debate is the safety net, if you like, of the bigger UK. But I noticed, for instance, when you're talking about the people resource and education, You actually, and I quote you here, Scotland's size is an advantage. The distance between policymakers and those affected is short. I think that's quite a key point. Could you elaborate on that?
If you're in a big 60 million country, let's take England, 55, leave Scotland alone, take England, 55 million. And the policy's made in London. As it's delivered up to Carlisle, they have lost sight of it. They don't really know how effective it has been because the feedback time is very long. If you're in a small country like ours, it doesn't take very long when a policy is issued to find out whether it's beneficial or whether it's harmful, and then you can alter it. The analogy is a big ship and a small ship. Big tanker takes a long time to turn. A wee one takes a very quick time to turn. And that's the case with all policies. And it's no accident that the most successful European countries and the most prosperous European countries are the Denmarks, the Norways, and the Switzerland and the Swedens, where again, small is, I don't use the term small is beautiful, but small is a very effective unit, political unit to operate on. And I say, as for the safety net, I mean, that safety net has huge holes in it now. That the debt that they have got and that they have to pay, they're now paying more in debt interest than they would spend on defence. I mean, that's how difficult the situation is down there. It's not so much that there's a safety net, we're being strangled by a country that's in decline.
Good. Let me now bring you on to a topic which you touch on in the book and has a very special significance for the Highlands. You actually quote from Andy Whiteman's book, The Poor Had No Lawyers, and you then go on to address some land ownership issues, and in particular absentee land ownership, and you had some particular policies there.
Well, I have to ask, I have to ask the question, is it really Scotland's soil? Never mind Scotland's oil. And of course the answer is no. We don't really know who owns our country. What we do know is that there are people who will take forestry for tax avoidance purposes. We also know that there are people who are foreigners who have no commitment to this country whatsoever, own estates as trophies. They're not you, they're there. I've got an estate in Scotland, and that guy who used to run Harrods, for example, or one of the Dubai royal family. I strongly object to that. And I'm also aware of the history of land in Scotland. I've read Tom Johnson's Our Noble Families and how they got the land in the first place. And as Andy Whiteman said, they had the political power and they had the lawyers to write the legislation. Well, this time we'll have the political power and we've got the lawyers to write the legislation. I would like to see a land and forestry commission. And one of the tests that we'd make is the Landowners Association argument that their ownership of the land and how they work it is beneficial to our community. That's never been tested. Never. So we'll test it. And we'll test title. And I'm aware that Andy Whiteman told me about this, that when the MacLeod and MacLeod decided to make some money, he was going to sell the Black Coolan. And then somebody says, here's your title. And he couldn't. Everybody had assumed he had it, and he assumed he had it. So I want the titles to be examined, whether they have valid title. Now, if they have valid title, then the land is ours. I want to examine whether or not their contention that their method of land ownership is beneficial to this community. And I've got questions. I attended a lecture once where people showed me we're on the same latitude in Norway as Scotland, where people had real viable communities going there. And those folk who did the lecture says, why on the same latitude do we not have the same thing? And it must be about land ownership, land management, and all the rest of it. I would also make it compulsory for tenant farmers to be able to buy their land. as part of the diversification of land holding. Because land in the rural communities is still power. I don't know a great deal about the Highland power, but I know a lot about some of the lowland border power. And the Buccleuch estates are powerful in their particular area because they are so dominant. So I would like to look at that. The other thing about foreigners, I argue that if a foreigner wants to buy land in Scotland, well, strictly speaking, you can't stop them, but there would have to be a 3-year residency qualification. In other words, are they committed to our country or not? And if they haven't got the 3-year qualification of residence, a real residence, then they don't get it. You can't buy it. Those who own it at the moment, I would convert to 99-year leases with the actual ownership reverting to the people of Scotland. That way, it's not as radical as Andy Whiteman, by the way, because I didn't want to produce something that was perfect. I wanted to produce a programme that was doable, that people would say, yeah, we can actually do that. This isn't pie in the sky. So these are steps that I've argued on the land to break the power of landowning in the whole of Scotland, to ensure that any foreigner who comes here, and it could be a nice chap from Portugal or something like that, but you've got to be 3 years resident here genuinely before you can buy an inch of Scottish soil. And you convert the others to 99-year leases. But the land belongs to us. And in my view, that would certainly make a contribution to a more democratic and a more prosperous Scotland as well. And nobody, but nobody, can come up here and use our land and forestry for tax avoidance purposes, whether it be here or any other country in the world.
I believe there's Mr. Barroso who's going to be retiring shortly. Perhaps he might want a nice little estate somewhere.
Well, he can certainly afford it on his pension, I can tell you.
Would you, however, be swapping, a private landlord for a state landlord?
Well, one of the things I learned when I was the MP for South Ayrshire, I represented miners. So, in the mining areas are rural areas, people forget that. I represented miners, fishermen and farmers. The fishermen and the farmers didn't vote for me, but I was very interested in how they operated. And I got very friendly with a number of farmers who explained farming to me in a way I'd never understood before. And I discovered a chemistry between a farmer and his land. Something that in the Soviet Union and in Mao's China they didn't understand. Stalin made this huge mistake of trying to industrialise agriculture. And you can't do that because you take away the chemistry. So I'm not some state holding of land, of course, but I'm for tenant farmers, private people, as it were, owning their own land with a commitment to their particular land. There'll be things like the Crown Estates, which I believe should be state-owned, and if they own land, therefore it's state-owned land. But most of the land in Scotland would remain in private ownership, but what I call beneficial private ownership for the community. And I don't think there's a contradiction between a tenant farmer owning his own land and the benefit to the community, because there is a commitment there to the community as well as to his land. So I don't see any contradiction in that whatsoever. And I think one of the mistakes made by the various faction of socialism in the earlier part of its development was not to understand this relationship between some people and their land.
Yeah, absolutely.